Hello everyone, Jules here. Today I'd like to talk about two books about the French esoteric system, and I want to talk about one particular French esotericist in particular. That is the French esotericist known as Papus. And I know a lot of people, when they think of the French esoteric system, they would normally automatically think about Eliphas Levi, but there were quite a number of other French esotericists before and particularly after Eliphas Levi, and I wanted to talk particularly about Papus today. Here is a photograph of Papus. Papus was his magical name. His real name was Gérard Encausse. Here's a photograph here. And he was actually a medical doctor by profession. And he was about 10 years old when Eliphas Levi died. So he was not really a contemporary of Eliphas Levi. He was the generation after that. He was quite an important French esotericist. He was influenced by Eliphas Levi, but he was quite different. He was different in the way that he was really an intellectual esotericist, and of all of the esotericists from this era, there's not all that many that were actually quite intellectual in their approach. He influenced other quite well-known esotericists who came after him, people like Manly Hall and Rudolf Steiner. So there's a photograph here, and he also was a member of the French order, the kabbalistic order of the Rose Cross, and that was founded very much around the same year as the Order of the Golden Dawn. So this was, a very important order that Papus was a member of, and he also took over he was actually in charge of that order when the founder moved on to found another order. But Papus was also very important he was a co-founder of the French Martinist order as well. So that was really important too. Now, the reason why I'm talking about Papus in particular is because there is a very important book that was published a couple of years ago, and there is a new printing of this, relatively new printing of this book. It's a hardcover book of one of the many books that Papus wrote. Papus is best known for Tarot of the Bohemians. That particular book is actually an anthology of French esotericism. Papus writes about tarot in that book, but there are also theories of other tarot theories of other French esotericists in that book as well. Now to talk about this hardcover book that's been published by Llewellyn. This is the second printing. Elementary Treatise of Occult Science by Papus. It's a very important book. I get the impression this may have flown under the radar because being a hardcover book, I don't think there is a major print on this. I get the impression that it may be almost like a limited edition, and I think this is the case because it's a hardcover book, and this is a reference book. This is not an easy book to read at all. As a matter of fact, the Golden Dawn books would be easier to read than this one. This is absolutely a reference book. And you need to keep in mind that Papus was a medical doctor by profession. The subtitle is Understanding the Theories and Symbols Used by the Ancients, the Alchemists, the Astrologers, the Freemasons, and the Kabbalists. The foreword is written by John Michael Greer, who is very well regarded in his own right. This is a translation by Mark Mikituk, and the translation is very accurate, and John Michael Greer actually mentions about these translations from the French that were done many years ago previously are not as accurate as this translation from the French, for example. There are translations from the French to English of Eliphas Levi's books, for example, and some of them were translated by Arthur Waite. And John Michael Greer has mentioned in his other writings that he's not impressed with the translations by Arthur Waite because these are not accurately done. Even Aleister Crowley was not impressed with the French translations of Arthur Waite. He actually referred to it as shoddy scholarship. And Crowley was another intellectual as well. He was very well educated, and he was a Cambridge scholar. So this is an accurate translation from the French. So that's important. And just to give you an idea of some of the things in this book. Now, this is a rather expensive book in a way because it is a hardcover book. This is about $60 American because it is a hardcover book, but it's also such an important book. That's why I get the impression that there may not be a major print run on this book. This is already the second printing. So this is the theory of occult science, and this really is science because Papus, being a medical doctor by profession, he talked about the usual esoteric things, but he also included biology and physiology of the human, for example, in regard to these things as well. So that is really unique. And Papus was actually quite a prolific author. For example, when I showed this photograph of Papus, this is an article here about one of the many books that he wrote called The Kabbalah Secret Tradition of the West. That's another book that he wrote. There is another book, sort of like the companion to this book in a way. This is the elementary treatise of occult science, but there is also another book on practical magic. So this is not the practical how-to book. This is very much the theory. But the theory behind Papus and his ideas and concepts about the occult were very much his own. He was, as I said, he was inspired by Eliphas Levi rather than influenced. I think inspired is more the word. So to give you an idea of what's in this book, part one is theory, but I would say most of this book is theory, really. There's diagrams in this book. So part 1 is theory, and one of them, one part of this he calls the method of ancient science. Part 2 is realization. So this is him talking about the origin of language, Hermes Emerald Tablet, alchemy, Hermetic texts, geometry, which is really important for Platonic solids and things like that, the Platonic solids. He talks about Agrippa's magical table, and he talks about astrology. Then he talks about pentacles, the Seal of Solomon, the Sphinx and its significance. The Sphinx was quite important to Papus, and he says why in this book. The pyramids, the pentagram. Then part 3 is what he calls adaptation. So he's talking about the earth and its secret history, which is all about evolution on all the different levels. The constitution of man. So this is where he's sort of talking about the evolution of humans. And that is from a thought point of view, from a thinking point of view, that includes biology as well, physiology as well. The astral plane. And then he talks about the occult science, what he calls occult science and contemporary science, so the contemporary science of his day. This book was actually written in 1898, so to get that into context. So it's around the turn of the 19th to 20th century. So, and there's extras, there's 3 appendices at the back of the book. Biographical notes is really important too. I'll mention that again in a moment. And he also saw himself as a mystic, so I like that. One of the many things that I like about Papus was that he was obviously a brilliant man, but the other thing I really like about him was that he really disliked esoteric charlatans. There were quite a few around in his day, and that's another video for me to possibly make. But believe me, these esoteric charlatans are well and truly still around. And in Papus' time, these were big, relatively big names, relatively well regarded, people who are still relatively well regarded. That, he saw some of these people as charlatans, and he did not shy away from saying so and saying why. So I really admire that about him. He really wanted to bring esotericism, he wanted it to be accepted. He wanted it to be brought to light, and he wanted it to be accepted as a science in itself. So that was really important. And I need to also mention here as well that I am so impressed by their theories of Papus that I have decided to switch over to French esotericism from here on. And I have already made a video recently about the fact that I have started to move away from the theories of the Golden Dawn. I see them as important from a foundational point of view, but I'm at the point now where I well and truly want to look into other esoteric systems that I find more challenging and different, and in some ways I find these deeper in some ways. So I really like the French esotericism, and I'm going to make probably some more videos with my channel this year in regard to the French esoteric system, because I'm well and truly moving into that now. The biographical notes at the back of the book are really important because it's a who's who of the French esoteric system. So I really like that. You'll get maybe a couple of people that were not strictly from that French esoteric system, but most of these people well and truly are. So I think that's great. I think that's a terrific inclusion. And there's an index. So this is a very important book. It is a reference book. As I was saying to you, it's not the kind of book that you would try to read cover to cover at all, because it is deep, it is intricate, it is detailed in theory, but it's an important, very important book. This is the first, and I think I'm fairly sure the only edition of this book that has been translated into English for the first time. It's a very important book. So for people who are interested, I'll put some details below the video. Elementary Treatise of Occult Science by Papus. I'm very impressed with this book. This is part of the focus for my year. This is part of my focus year for this year. It's going to take a lot of study in this French esoteric system for me. Now, the second book I'm mentioning for today, this book is related very much to the book I just showed. This book is mentioned in the foreword by John Michael Greer in regard to this book, because it really sets the context and the historical era. So this is called Occult Paris, The Lost Magic of the Belle Epoque by Tobias Churton. Another hardcover book. I don't show many hardcover books. I don't have all that many because of the cost. But if a book is really worthwhile, then I will purchase. There is a whole chapter in this book about Papus, and amongst other things, this book really sets the historical period. It talks about the order, the kabbalistic order of the Rose Cross in here. There's a chapter on that as well. So this is why John Michael Greer mentions this book in the note for the foreword of the other book. So he talks about Eliphas Levi's mentioned in this book as well, but that's more of a prelude to this particular period, which is the Belle Epoque period. And so he talks about, there's a chapter on the kabbalistic order of the Rose Cross, Papus, and the differences between some of the different Rosicrucian orders as well of the time. And he also sets the scene with the music and the literature at the time. For example, Debussy Debussy was quite influenced by the French esoteric movement of the time. There's a chapter on the Gnostic Church, and there was also a Rose Cross Salon, which was also a kind of a sub-order as well. There's a chapter on the Martinist order, and then the last chapter is about the legacy, and it is an important legacy. I think a lot of people, as I was saying, they do think of Eliphas Levi, but they don't realise that the French esoteric movement was actually quite a long one. So, for example, especially in regard to tarot, that French esoteric period started at least 100 years before Eliphas Levi. And then it continued after Eliphas Levi as well. And the thing about the French esoteric movement is that it very much inspired and influenced the Golden Dawn. The Golden Dawn wanted to have their own English esoteric system. So this is a really important book. This book you can read cover to cover, and there are some great photographs in here, terrific photographs that really set the time period. Just amazing photographs of people. It's very much a who's who in here. There's some colour photographs as well in here about the art of the time as well. Because I really like this art of the period, particularly symbolist art. There was symbolist poetry as well. There were poets that were influenced by this period. So this really is a fascinating book. It's a great book. This is a book that you could get to learn more about the French esoteric system, or as a movement. You could get this book. You could read this on its own, even if you don't particularly intend to get the other book. I think these two books go together very much and very well if you do want to get the Papus book that I showed. So Occult Paris, The Lost Magic of the Belle Epoque by Tobias Churton, and I'll put some details below the video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.